on our website fairly soon after this presentation is over. So again, welcome everyone to our spring education series for 2001. This workshop series is sponsored by MnDOT's Office of Aeronautics and administered by the Airport Technical Assistance Program, also known as AirTAP, at the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota. So AirTAP began in 2000. It is the first of its kind in the nation, offering practical yet specialized training and resources across the state for those who operate, maintain, and administer Minnesota's public use airports. Minnesota's general aviation personnel across the state have had access to targeted information and training to reduce costs and improve the safety, quality, and the overall efficiency of airport operations. AirTAP also helps support airport staff build a community network for exchanging best practices and learning from one another. Oops, sorry about that. One too far. So AirTAP provides 4 major services. We do education and training. So this educational series is part of our education training services. We also do a fall Airports 101 series, and we also help with an annual conference every year. We provide technical assistance, access to experts, and we have a variety of resources on our website, which is airtap.umn.edu. On this website, we have a briefings that goes out quarterly, as well as some printed guidebooks that you can download and use as you may need to. As I mentioned earlier, this is part of our education series. So we have 8 different topics that we're presenting throughout March and May. We're actually on our 3rd one right here. And then we have 5 more coming up over the next several weeks. They are all being recorded. The first 2 are available on our website for those who are unable to make either of those. And if you're new to Zoom, here's a high-level tutorial. Along the bottom of your screen, there's a black ribbon. So we have mute. Everyone's automatically muted. During the Q&A, please unmute yourself if you'd like to talk directly with Mike. Otherwise, you can just stay muted. You can also have the option of showing your video. That's also, again, completely optional. You can see everyone who's participating on this training today. And the chat box. So this is where we encourage you throughout Mike's presentation to submit your questions as they come to your mind as he's talking. Again, we will address them later in the presentation, but here's a really great spot just to record it so we have it. And then also if you want to share any other information that you would like anyone else to know about, go ahead and put it in the chat box. The green box, the green little square here is share screen. You won't be having to share it, but just know that you could take control of the presentation, which you won't have to. This is being recorded, as I mentioned, and feel free to use the reaction. There's hand clapping, there's some cheering. So this is just something fun for you guys to use to continue with participating in today's training. So that's what I have today. Again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. And I'm going to hand it over to Melissa Underwood, who is today's moderator.
Thanks, Catherine. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's session and introduce our speaker today is Mike Harder. He's the Environmental Compliance Administrator for the Metropolitan Airports Commission. And we'd like to welcome him today and turn it over to him for his presentation on fuel operations and tank compliance and spill prevention control and countermeasures. So here you go, Mike.
Thank you, Melissa. Sound check, can you hear me? Okay.
Yep, we can hear you.
You can see my screen as well?
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Catherine. Hello, my name's Mike Harder with the Airports Commission. So I am going to give a presentation today on tank compliance and spill prevention control and countermeasures. The agenda for today is going to be focusing on underground storage tanks, above ground storage tanks, spill prevention control and countermeasures, and then some Q&A. I will be taking a pause after each topic, for example, after underground storage tanks, or if Melissa thinks during the chat there's a pressing question. I do want to mention that I will not or be going in depth on the industrial stormwater permit, which is another in my opinion, another major compliance factor that it influences the aviation community. So the intent today is USTs, ASTs, and then how that can trigger an SPCC plan. My intent also, before I get into a little bit of background, is to show you how I have navigated the process, how I work with the aviation community, whether it's a leaseholder or an FBO, state regulatory agency, what resources exist out there to navigate the process, use the tools in order to understand your system. I cannot stress enough that underground storage tanks and above ground storage tanks, they could be different from airport to airport. There could be turnover, knowing who is the operator, who is not the controller of that underground system. So again, my intent is to show you how to navigate the process and what tools exist. As Catherine mentioned, this will be recorded, and it was distributed yesterday via email. I made a point when putting this presentation together that there are links in there, so you can definitely use this as a tool, as a resource. And my email will be at the end, so if you do want to reach out to me separately and bounce an idea, feel free to do so. Again, Mike Carter with the Airports Commission, been in the aviation industry for 20 plus years. 9 of those years were in the private sector, been with MAC as an environmental administrator since 2005. Kind of a day-to-day of what I do is to ensure MAC is meeting compliance requirements based on MAC operations pertaining to aviation, that is underground storage tanks, above ground hazardous waste, the industrial stormwater permit. I feel that we are in the same boat as an FBO, since we do have the same type of systems and be located and operating at the airport. I do try to provide guidance to the commercial operators when they're navigating the process, whether it's changing of their operation or potentially a new commercial operator is coming in and they are considering adding an above ground storage tank. So again, USTs are going to be the first subject matter. Who's the driver of the USTs? One is the Environmental Protection Agency, likely also the Minnesota Fire Marshal, the local fire chief. I will not be discussing that because potentially a fire chief may have different interpretations of fire code issues. I would hope that you would have a good rapport with them if there are some suggestions or recommendations that they are asking, and then also lower local jurisdictions. The number one driver of tank compliance is the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, which is under the Environmental Protection Agency. Before I get into the 7150 form, which is all the rules and regulations, is the state agency, which is the MPCA, must have or required to be at least as stringent as the EPA, which they do meet those requirements. But for example, the 2 bullet points underneath that, they do go beyond the federal requirement. One example is emergency fuel shutoff, and then also fuel dispensing equipment. I will touch on this later in the presentation. Before I jump into that form, the MPCA is required for funding and per their program to conduct a 3-year inspection or a UST inspection every 3 years. And I can say from experience, it's almost to a T with clockwork. When they come out, I have always made a point to be on site to walk through those inspections because it's an opportunity to learn of what changes have occurred with the regulatory requirements. And I also make a point to put it on my Outlook calendar 3 years from now, about a month prior, getting my ducks in a row when that MPCA inspection is going to take place. Now I'm jumping into the 7150 UST storage and tank forms. I just wanted to use this as a guide. As you can see, it breaks down the rules and regulations. Likely you may have to go in depth with this if an MPCA inspection.
Hey, Mike.
I'm sorry.
We only see your PowerPoint.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah. So I think you'll have to. minimize your PowerPoint.
How is that?
Oh, perfect.
Okay. So this was a link via the PowerPoint of the rules and regulations associated with 7150. I'm not going to be going in depth with this, but this just breaks down each code and subsection. So for example, if the MPCA inspector comes out and indicates that rule 7150-0330, methods of leak detection for tanks, is not being requested or not being meant, you know what potentially they are referring to. Again, this will be in a guide in the presentation. And now I should be back on the main presentation.
Yep, looks good.
So common USTs in aviation, some of these might look familiar. These are photos from the aviation community. Upper left-hand corner is just a simple UST. You can see the two dispensers, the large manhole cover, likely where that pump is, likely the fill port. That middle top picture shows a mobile refueler, dispenser, and a self-fuel system, likely associated with an FBO or potentially self-fuel. Here's a photo of a dispenser at a MAC airport. The bottom center is a sump showing the pump, and then the monitor in the lower left-hand corner, which I refer to as the ATG, which is your automatic tank gauge. You may have a different. I am mostly familiar with the Veeder-Root system. It could be a Veeder-Root TSL 300 or 350. When the MPCA indicates automatic tank gauge, my interpretation is that is your fuel monitor. That does all your thinking for you, whether it's your fuel levels, your leak detection, some sensors, delivery needed. So it does all your maintenance in your O&M, depending on how you have that program. Here's an exhibit of a simple underground storage tank. Cannot stress enough, you may have some of these components tied to your UST system, or you may not. I will be touching on dispenser sump because it is tied to compliance. Like I mentioned, the ATG, your automatic tank gauge, that likely is doing a lot of thinking for your monitor. And then I will also be touching on the spill bucket and fill port. I think this is a really important slide to understand. The underground storage tanks located in Minnesota, this was provided to the MPCA. This presentation was given, or this information was given from a presentation about several years ago, and this was a little eye-opening to me, and it indicated for me to do a little bit of research. The average life expectancy, this is according to the PCA, and I have spoke to industry experts, that the anticipated life of an underground storage tank is approximately 25 calendar years. As you can see, 63, I think it's around 63% of the underground storage tanks located in Minnesota are at 20 years or exceed that. So my one suggestion I have for you, if you are a tank owner of the underground storage system for your city, your FBO, I would highly recommend knowing how to determine the age of your system. I do believe that systems can last longer than the anticipated life. As expected, it all boils down to your O&M and maintenance of that system. This is a busy slide. I'm gonna kind of overview everything on the slide, and then I'm going to take a deeper dive about navigating the process. I'm going to be going to the MPCA website, showing you where that storage tank information is, and then looking at the underground storage tank sections. I'm going to run through the tank database of how to look for your underground storage tank and show the general information of how to understand your system. The MPCA tank database is public information. So there is a list of all underground storage tanks that are located in the state of Minnesota. Like I indicated, I will be touching on a few examples. Then I'll go in depth on the 2019 UST Q&A booklet. This is a great tool if you need to understand what system you have, and what you need to do on a monthly basis or an annual basis. I will touch on the MPCA tank inspector. You should have a good knowledge of who your tank inspector is. That can be a great resource of reaching out to them if you are in the early stages or want to clarify of what you should be doing on a monthly or annual basis. I'll touch on change ownership, inspections, and then further in the presentation or a couple slides down, I'll get into the A, B, and C operating. So first, navigating the MPCA website. Let me, and you are more than welcome to pull up a browser on your end and kind of go through this process and actually look for your underground storage tank if you so desire. So you should be seeing the main homepage for the MPCA.
Yep.
Under waste, you see hazardous waste and problem materials, and here is the storage tanks. So I'm going to be focusing on the storage tanks and what information exists for USTs. As you can see on the right, ASTs and USTs is a good source. If you scroll down, it gives you some good general information. But like I mentioned, I want to go to the tank database. So I'm going to be typing in airports right now. I'm going to be going to Hennepin County, and I'm going to be looking for max owned above ground or underground storage tank located at Flying Cloud Airport. So as you can see, airports in Hennepin County, there are 5 sites that came up. I'm going to be clicking on the Flying Cloud site. This is a unique identifier right here, 1959. When this tank was registered, the MPCA designated a unique tank ID for that site. I would stress that you should know what that tank ID is for your underground storage tank that you own and maintain. Also includes the property address, the owner, and then this is who is considered the owner and operator of that tank. If you scroll down, here's a history of the tanks that have existed tied to the Metropolitan Airports Commission at Flying Cloud Airport. As you can see, we have had 4 removed sites, 4 removed tanks. Here's what the product was stored for, and here's if it was above ground or below ground. As you can see, we have an active 2,500 gallon UST, which is stored for diesel for the MAC equipment. It was installed in 1992, and we registered it in 1993. So that is the first early stage of understanding your system of what is the tank ID, who is considered the property owner. You click on that link for 5. This shows you what type of tank it is. And this is going to trigger what would be your monthly inspections or annual inspections or certifications. So as you can see, this tank is a fiberglass system. It's double walled. Since it's not a steel tank, it's not needed. The piping material is fiberglass, and it is double walled. Again, pipe corrosive. It's not a steel system, so we do have flex tube, so it's not needed. Our dispenser type is safe suction, and the spill containment wall type is single wall. It will also go into depth what your overfill protection is, tank release detection, and piping release detection. When I get into the 2019 guidebook, you can enter this information in that guidebook, and then the decision tree will tell you what you should be doing on a monthly or annual basis. So this is information of what you would need in order to fill that out if you are in the stages of either learning your system from the beginning or potentially confirming what needs to happen on an annual or monthly basis. So back to storage tanks, kind of bouncing around a little here, I apologize. I wanted to give another example to see if we could find one in the aviation community. Alexandria, I think that's in Douglas County. Let's see, let's just find airports in Douglas. It's not Douglas. Let's just find airports. Give me a second, please. Now, so as you can see, there are, for airports with no county, there are 9 Red Lake Falls Airport. Just out of curiosity, let's click on that and see what we can find. Here's the site unique ID. Here's where it's located. Here is who's considered the owner. As you can see, they have no active tanks, and what was stored there was gasoline. So back to the presentation. Like I mentioned, I ran through the tank database, which is located on the MPCA website, ran through that example. Now I'm going to go into depth on the 2019 booklet. And this is on the MPCA website. And again, this will be a link for you. I'm going to be kind of showing the first 12 pages of how to navigate this guidebook. This is I believe the 3rd version. Hey, Melissa, mine is freezing up on me. Let's see if it's just downloading.
Okay.
Do you want to take control and pull up that PDF?
Yep, I do have it here. If you want me to share my screen, let me know.
Please do.
Okay, you'll have to stop sharing yours.
There
So
we go.
I have it right here. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
And then you're going to have to drive, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so if you could gradually go down to, keep on going to the next page. And is it possible to enlarge this for the audience? Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If you go down to, keep on going to the next page. This is all general information about the rules and regulations. Keep on going to page, table of contents, page 6. So right here, this is exactly what I was talking about with the tank database. This is a great worksheet or a great template to fill this information for you as a tank owner. And as you can see, the tank site ID number, I think ours was 1959 for the Airports Commission. Name and address, it was all under that tank database. Phone number, if you so desire. If you need clarification of how to retrieve this information, you can see on the right-hand side, 16, 21, or 22 in this guidebook will show you how to navigate and get this answer. If you continue to scroll down, site owner might be in a different location. Tank status, as I went through that example, there were active tanks, which ones are considered active. Tank information, for the example that I used, it was tank 5. It was a capacity of 2,500, product stored, diesel. Tank type was a double-walled piping type, double-walled dispenser type. All of that can be entered. You can continue to scroll down. Here's where it gets a little bit interesting for your tank leak detection. For the MAC one, we had ATG, which is automatic tank gauge. SIR is a daily level that either you would use the monitor to do your daily level. So say, for example, January 1, your level was 1,000 gallons. You dispense fuel throughout the month of January. You are sticking that tank or using that HEG to manually collect that level. And then at the end of the month, you have your start and ending volume, and then what volume was dispensed. And don't quote me on this, but I think you can have a ratio of 0.2 gallons. That could be different. That is one method. Manual gauge can only be used for tanks, I believe, 1,000 gallons or less. I don't think that is tied to the aviation community. Interstitial monitoring, this is becoming more and more popular. If for a double wall tank, you would have an interstitial sensor in that secondary containment of that from that primary tank. For example, the Airports Commission does have fiberglass with an ATG as our primary leak detection, but as backup, we are also using interstitial monitoring. I've sensed in the aviation community, a lot of tank owners right now are keeping a low volume of their tanks. You should have a good understanding with your ATG. If your tank capacity is, let's say 10,000 gallons, you need a minimum of 5,000 gallons in order to conduct an ATG leak detection. If you are not maintaining that 5,000 gallons or greater of capacity, you're going to get a low volume or a failed test. At that point, I would suggest to you that you should consider switching over to an SIR, or if it is a double wall tank and you don't have an interstitial sensor, maybe switch over to an interstitial sensor as your primary leak detection. A lot of information thrown out there, but again, I cannot stress enough, understand whatever system that you own and operate. Piping leak detection under section G kind of boils down to electrical, mechanical, interstitial. I mostly deal with safe suction, so I know what I have to do. Interstitial with the double walled piping. So it all again depends on what your system is. If you need clarification, again on the right hand side with those page references, you can look at that information. Going to section H deals with corrosive protection. If you have a sacrificial anoid or impressed current, that might trigger different monthly inspections versus annual certification. Internal lining, I have really not too much experience, but again, if you have that, look into that. As expected, fiberglass would be non-applicable because it's not a steel tank or the piping. Overfill protection, you are required to have one of three systems. Automatic shutoff could be in your drop tube where you fill in. It would have a flapper about halfway down. Starting in 2021, every 3 years, that drop tube will have to be inspected to ensure that it actually is operating as it's intended. Ball floats, that also could be in the drop tube or in your vent pipe. Based on my history, ball floats have had a challenge of maintaining compliance. We actually just switched over due to failed compliance out at MSP for our 4-tank system at South Fuel due to invalid float levels. So we switched that over to an overfill alarm. My suggestions, if you have a ball float valve as your overfill protection, I would watch that closely. Likely that system will fail down the road. The automatic shutoff, I think, has worked solid for me. Overfill protection is simply an overfill alarm that is visual, usually on where the tank monitor or the shed, so to speak, or somewhere in a visible location when the contractor is doing a bulk fuel transfer into your underground storage system. Vapor recovery, I do not have to deal with that since this is in-house fuel systems. I would work with your state agency to see if you need to do that under the vapor recovery. If you continue to go down to section K, monthly sump inspections, annual inspections, unusual operating conditions, compatibility. Again, it all depends on what your system is and what components are in place. For a safe suction system, for example, that the Airports Commission owns and maintains for our USTs, we have a safe suction, so everything drains back into the sump. So if we were to have a release with that double wall piping, that's where we have a sump sensor where that pump is located, which would trigger alarm and then trigger action for us. Annual inspections, potentially by a third party, again, sections 132 to 152. I think you understand, the intent here is understand how to get this answer depending on your system. If you scroll down to page 8 and 9, these are the terms, and this is what is defined. This is a very good resource as well, as in the tank type, what options could be, If you continue on to page 9, please. Bare steel, suction system. And now if you go to page 12, this is a great tool for you. So this is going to tell you what is required in the frequency. So for automatic tank gauge alarms, you are required to inspect this on a monthly basis and document it. For example, with that Vita root system that you saw earlier, on a monthly basis, I need to document that that monitor is functioning as it is intended. In addition to that, I also need to document that my primary leak detection, whether it was the interstitial or it's doing that 4-hour test every Sunday, is passing that. I'm required to save that information for 7 calendar years. Likely when the MPCA comes out and conducts a tank inspection, they're going to likely look at the last calendar year. If you have last 6 months of past leak tests and solid documentation, likely they're only going to be looking at the last 3 or 4 months. But if they look at the last 3-4 months and missed information, low volumes, they will probably dig a little bit deeper. So if you want to scroll up a little bit, this will dictate, scroll down, sorry. This will dictate, again, what you are required to do on an annual versus monthly, or potentially have to do both. I'm going to go back to the presentation, Melissa, so if you could stop and then I will start sharing. So you should be seeing the main page with the guidebook online.
Yep, we do.
Okay, great. A lot of information that I threw out to you. The next is the tank inspector program and change of ownership and inspections. I am going to go back to the MPCA website. And you should be seeing hang on. I might have pushed too many buttons here. Did it kick me off? What are you seeing?
I just see your mouse spinning with the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. How about, I can't even stop sharing.
I think I can override if you want me to share the website.
Please, please. Adapt, right? Good chance to grab a sip of coffee.
Right. I should have the website up now, Mike. Do you see it?
I do not. But okay. Now
There we go. We see it, Melissa.
Yep. Okay. I should be able to go back in now. Let me try if you don't mind. Okay, let me go to this page. Okay, so all right, I will just go with you pulling up the MPCA website if you don't mind. So again, under waste, the down arrow, under hazardous, second one, storage tanks. So if we were to go to the right-hand side under USTs, this will provide a lot of information about your system and how to understand it and how to get these questions. I do want to touch on the A and B operator. If you can click on that on the top under in this section. Thank you, Catherine. So this pertains to the A and B operator. This is very common when the MPCA comes out and does their inspection. This is, I can guarantee you, this is going to be one of the questions that they will ask, and they will verify that whoever is your A or B operator is actually currently on staff. The best way I can explain this is a certified exam open book depending on what your system is. The best way I can explain it is the example that I had to use. So the A operator for the Airports Commission would be the airport managers, and also myself, because they are the kind of the controller, paying the bill, so to speak, owner of that system. The B operators are the MAC maintenance crew that are doing the day-to-day fueling of that operation, maybe ordering the fuel. And what you are required to do is not self-certified, but take the certified exam depending on your system. And the intent there is it's another opportunity so the owners and operators know what their system is. Again, this is an online exam. You would create an account depending on what your system is, and it is an open book. When I did this several years ago, it was about 35 to 40 questions. They were pretty self-explanatory. That 2019 guidebook was a reference and could be utilized. You could go back, Catherine. If you could scroll down. So the 10-day notice, I do want to mention on that under new installation, you are required to submit this 10-day notice if you are doing changes to your underground storage system. This could be a change of ownership. This could be removing of the tank. This could be site work. PCA likely is not going to be conducting a site visit, but they would be asking that you do this, this 10-day notice. If we could go back to the presentation, I think I'll move on. Kind of some monthly examples. And you should be seeing my, with the guidebook up.
Yep, we do.
So monthly versus annual. Again, visual inspections of all components of your system with documentation. I would look at where the piping joints are. I would look for leaks. I would, and try to answer or create yes/no questions. Over the years, I have made a point with our cloud system for our monthly inspections or a 3-ring binder with a designated questionnaire with the sheets. I make a point to have yes/no questions. For example, is the ATG operating as it is intended? Yes or no? If no, what action is taken? Did for the month of July, did the leak detection pass its results? Yes or no? Did the sump sensor go into alarm mode for the month of July? Yes or no? So knowing that, using that guidebook can tell you what kind of yes or no questions that you should be answering. That is my personal opinion. I feel like it is just easier and more efficient out in the field when you are doing that inspection form. Signage, I think you should always doing a checklist for signage, whether it's an in-house unattended fuel system or house fuel, so to speak. And then if you go to that MPCA example, let's see if this works. Yeah, that's not working, so I'm gonna go back. So on this link for the MPCA example, it will, within that guidebook, it will show you an example of monthly questions that you could ask. Now, keep in mind, those questions in that MPCA template cover all the potential questions. So you need to go through and kind of cross-reference in which ones that you do not need to answer. Annual basis, I cannot stress enough, have a good rapport with your fueling contractor. You are required, all underground storage tanks, to have a third-party certified contractor from the MPCA come out and conduct the functionality test. This pertains to any underground storage tank that you own and maintain. They are going to be on site for single wall steel tanks. They are going to be on site for impressed current steel tanks. They are going to be on site for double wall tanks. What they do is a third party contractor will come on site and test your ATG to make sure that it is functioning as intended. They will put your sensors in alarm mode. For example, if your primary interstitial sensor is your primary leak detection, they will pull that out of that liner and then stick it in a bucket and make sure that it goes into alarm mode. The sump sensor, they will also do that same. New for this year, and I'll touch on this a little, but also that drop tube with that new inspection. The rough cost is about $450 for a 2-tank system. My suggestion would be on site and actually document what they do. They are required to provide you a certification of everything of what you looked at. These are kind of common underground storage tank violations from the MPCA. No class A or B operator, already touched on that. Monthly tank leak detection, I've already touched on that. Again, depending on a lot of systems right now are reducing their capacity and they're not passing their ATG. You may have to look into options to potentially do an SIR leak detection or potentially interstitial. No annual ATG check, contractor versus owner. I want to touch on this right now. It's my understanding that the city, city entities are likely the owners of underground storage systems within the Minneapolis or Minnesota aviation community. And a lot of times the cities are contracting out to a contractor to oversee the day-to-day operations of their fuel system. The PCA, and I've experienced this, the PCA would look to the owners and the contractors as liability. So the owner, it is in the best interest of the owner to ensure that the contractor, if they're just changing the filter, ordering fuel, are they also meeting the compliance requirements based on that system? Another common violation, no annual line tightness or line leak detector test. And again, remember every 3 calendar years, the PCA is going to be on site. Takeaways for USTs, understand your system. I touched on a lot of resources, the 2019 guide, the MPCA site, how to navigate that process, MPCA staff, maybe your contractor. Other resources that exist in the industry is a Petroleum Equipment Institute, aviation industry trade groups, and there are newsletters if you are part of the petroleum market or service associated questions or associations. So I'm going to pause for questions right there. Again, I haven't been keeping an eye on the chat. I don't know if there is any questions. I've been rambling quite a bit. I apologize, but I hope you have some takeaways.
Yeah, we don't have any questions in the chat right now, but this would be a great opportunity if anybody has any questions about their underground storage tank that they'd like to ask Mike. The next section is moving to above ground storage tanks. So if there are any questions, let us know.
All right, I will move on to above ground storage tanks. It is somewhat apples to apples with USTs. It is the same MPCA website. It is the same regulatory agencies that are driving it. Couple unique things is the MPCA does inspect above ground storage tanks, but it is not as stringent as the USTs. That is my opinion of being in the industry. I have a sense that is going to change. And the reason why is it appears to me that more and more entities are moving away from underground storage tanks to above ground storage tanks. When a tank inspector does a UST inspection, it does take a lot of time and resources. And as that frees up, I think they are going to start incorporating above ground storage tank system. Again, same players, EPA, Minnesota Fire Marshal, local jurisdictions, could be a county, could be a city inspector. But again, at the end of the day, the MPCA oversees the compliance components to the ASTs. Here's a couple photos. You might see your system on here. Again, 4,000 on the right, couple, looks like 3 ASTs, probably avgas and Jet A, and maybe actually 2 MOGAS on that one. You can see the dispenser. You can see the credit card reader. What is great about these photos is you do see some good labeling, and that seems to be in really good operating condition as in monthly inspections. It appears that the owner and operators are looking at these systems pretty good. Here's another example, emergency fuel shutoff. This is a key component for the MPCA. Again, here's a link for the 7151. Reminder, 7150 was USTs. 7151 is associated with the ASTs. I'm not going to open that link, but that is going to be a reference for you. Navigating the AST systems. MPCA website again, tank database. Again, when I went into that example, that tank database does have above ground storage tank and USTs. So you could go the same method if you own an underground storage system and an above ground storage system. There's a likely chance that you have that same MPCA unique identifier. Also included in this presentation is the compliance calendar. And again, your MPCA inspector is a great resource. This compliance calendar will show you what you could be doing on a monthly basis depending on a kind of a checklist. Monthly visual or monthly versus annual for the AST. Again, create a new unique checklist for that specific to your system. Signage is critical for the MPCA when they do intake inspections. That is probably their #1 violation. Again, highly recommended to use yes, no questions when you are doing your monthly inspection of that system. In addition, have look at potentially, let me look at my notes here just to make sure I touch on everything. Look for cracks, leaks, corrosive issues, yes, no, or releases for an annual basis. Again, this is third-party certified contractor. You are required to do this. Rough cost is, again, that I've seen in the industry is about $450 for a 2-tank system. They are going to do a functionality test for alarms, sensors, calibration, etc. There are certified AST inspectors. This is kind of a critical when your contractor comes on site. I am only familiar with the type 4, which is kind of the most, the type 4 AST systems, which are double walled with continuous leak detections. So that has to be certified by a third-party contractor on an annual basis. For example, Max New Fuel system at Crystal Airport, we have a double wall system where that interstitial is my continuous leak detection. That has to be checked on an annual basis by a third-party contractor. And then it also is with that, like I said, the double wall system. Type 1, if I recall, is a single wall steel tank. So that could have, or that would have, different annual certification depending on what that system is. Line leak detection, again, if it's a pressurized system versus suction. Here's 2 examples of understanding your systems and having good signage. One is from an aviation community, which I think is well written, pretty self-explanatory. The one on the right with the red boundary is the new system that's out at Crystal Airport, what we have in place. It's pretty self-explanatory for pilots when they're doing a fuel transaction. Here are some common AST violations from the MPCA. Like I mentioned, labels, tanks not labeled with the product or tank's capacity. It should have avgas, 10,000 gallons, facility address, and phone numbers. No emergency contact is another common challenge. Conversion chart, tank volume measured in feet and inches. When that contractor comes out on an annual basis, make sure that you have a conversion chart. If not, they can easily provide that for you. Touch on some other ones. No annual tests of the electronic equipment used to monitor the tank system. Already touched on that. Again, interstitial or line leak detectors, ATG. And then no documentation. Document when you go out on a monthly basis and do your yes/no questions. AST takeaways. Again, understanding your system, same resources as above. And I'm going to pause for any questions before I jump into the SPCC stuff.
Great, thanks, Mike. Does anybody have any questions or about their specific tanks that they're seeing at their airport or their process? I don't see anything at the chat at this moment, or you can unmute yourself as well and ask Mike.
All right, well, I will jump into SPCC requirements. Again, this is the intent and what the rules are. The EPA requires certain facilities that store or use petroleum products to develop and implement an SPCC plan. An SPCC plan purpose is to have a written plan that presents the procedures you will use to prevent spills and to manage a spill if they occur. So the best way I can explain it is your spill prevention is your control measures, your best management practices. For example, you may have a staff member on site for fuel transfers. You may have spill containment material on hand. You may have your tank located in a designated spot. So those are your spill procedures or your spill controls. And then your countermeasures are, okay, what do you do if it hits the fan, so to speak, and you cannot control that spill? The intent of going through the SPCC plan is to walk through 3 examples of where you would need an SPCC plan, and then potentially what action items you would have to do depending on your operations. I won't go into it, but the link is tied for that 40 CFR Part 112. Here's some common activities in the airport community. Large consumers of fuel and petroleum products. Activities include vehicle, aircraft fueling and fuel transfers. Maintenance activity for both aircraft and ground support equipment uses oil and lubricants. These activities increase the chance for unwanted spills or leaks on the airport that can impact stormwater or groundwater. Applicability. Here's the first question that you need to ask yourself in the decision tree process. Facilities using or storing oil products with total above ground oil storage capacity of 1,320 gallons or USTs capacity greater than 42,000 gallons. Operations common at aviation facilities, oil fuel storage containers greater than 55 gallons. Bulk storage containers such as ASTs, USTs, mobile portable containers, or even mobile refuelers. It is based on the shell capacity. For example, you have a mobile refueler of 1,500 gallons, but you only maintain 750 gallons of that mobile refueler. Your AST capacity is 1,500 gallons. Immediately that would trigger you to require to have an SPCC plan in place. I can't stress that enough. I've seen that, not a challenge, but in understanding what the shell capacity is versus your current level. Types of oils again, petroleum, fuel oil, sludge, oil refuels, mixed oil, and waste. Facility owner requirements, I'm going to touch on a few, but they're not limited to. This is a pretty wordy slide, and I wanted to actually add more. So again, this is going to be used as a reference, so you can go back and look at this information down the road. I'll touch on a few of these though. Provide overfill protection, bullet 2, high level alarm or audible vent. Provide size secondary containment. Could be dikes in place, double wall tanks. Conduct periodically inspections of testing. Describe operating procedures to prevent oil spills unique for your facility. Describe control measures such as secondary containment. Keep in mind, if your 55-gallon drums are located inside a building structure that is tied to sanitary with a flammable waste trap, I would consider that secondary containment. Causes of common releases in the industry. I apologize, but the purple is 12%. As you can see, the most common is piping for fuel releases. The next common is 32%, which is delivery. That's why I think with the ASTs and USTs, this is kind of the vulnerable spot of when it can occur. The piping, if you're doing your monthly inspections, it should not be a surprise to you then when that elbow of that steel or flex tube, if you start seeing a slow leak, you would have to address that. Now I'm going to kind of touch on some examples of what is applicable and what is not applicable. Again, start thinking about what your operations are or what you are tied to. So on the left-hand side, the 250-gallon used oil tank is applicable because it's above ground and it stores a petroleum product. The middle photo is two 10,000 gallons Jet A and 100 low lead petroleum product. On the far right is a generator, a 250-gallon AST. That would be considered a petroleum product, so that would be applicable towards that 1,300 gallons. Mobile refuelers, looks like one is capacity of 800. Friendly reminder, capacity is 600, and then the gallon at 800, but that would qualify as 800 gallons for your measurement. Left-hand side, likely a 1,200-gallon mobile refueler. Some more examples, not applicable is the underground storage tank because it is less than 42,000 gallons of underground storage tanks. If your site had three underground storage tank at 15,000 gallons each, that would trigger you to have an SPCC plan. Looking at the middle one, applicable are the 55-gallon drums. What's not applicable is that white 30-gallon drum. What's not applicable on the far right is that 40-gallon diesel tank tote in the back of a work vehicle. This is kind of a busy side, but gives you kind of an example of what is applicable and not applicable dealing with oil or oil that is used under your operations. So now I'm going to run through 3 examples. If you can see on the left-hand side, the first column is a container of what it is for an above ground storage system, the contents, the capacity, and then if it's applicable when you are trying to determine if you need an SPCC plan. So as you can see, that generates a total of, oops, I mistakenly went to a slide above. So here's the first scenario. This grand total is 1,055 gallons. If you add up everything for the capacity that is not shaded, shaded are information that would not be considered applicable. So since you are below that 1,320 gallons, you would not need to have an SPCC plan in place. My suggestion to you is if you are at this or near that 1,300 gallons, is understand your operations. If you work closely with the maintenance shop or work closely with your mechanics who are doing maintenance on aircraft, encourage them or keep a close eye on them to make sure that they don't decide to order 2 250-gallon totes of used oil, because all of a sudden that would trigger you to have an SPCC plan. For example, engine oil tote of 250 gallons, let's say they decide to add 2 of those or add more 55-gallon drums. Next example is running through the applicable storage is over that 1,300 gallons or the 1,320 gallons. This would require you to have an SPCC plan. From my understanding, this does qualify you as a facility. that you can self-certify because you have less than 10,000 gallons and you have no one storage unit or one AST that has 5,000 gallons or greater. So again, you can self-certify if your applicable storage is less than 10,000 gallons or you do not have one tank system standalone that is 5,000 gallons or greater. This would require you to have an SPCC plan, but in your benefit, you could self-certify. In my experience, I've seen it both ways. Personally, I would probably hire a consultant to draft up everything and go that route. If you have the time and resources, I would gladly self-certify, but it can be a challenge to put this system together. From my experience, a solid SPCC plan is around $4,000, which would require annual training, monthly inspections, and several other components. So this is a professional engineer certified example. As you can see, we reached that threshold above 10,000 gallons. So this is when you would be required to have a professional engineer, a PE, sign off on this system. Again, this is probably going to cost about $4,000 to $6,000 to put this in place. Something unique is you can see the mobile refueler. Keep those in mind. A lot of times people forget about those. So you want to have a good inventory of what you have in place. I'm going to pause right there because that can be a little confusing and a little challenging of trying to kind of think about what your operations. Is there anything in the chat, Melissa, that if not, I'll continue.
No, not at this time.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. So some key SPCC elements. Again, I'm not going to touch on all of these. These are kind of key points. They are not limited to, because I probably would have had about 3 slides. This is why I encourage you to potentially reach out and explore bringing in a consultant, because if you do have an SPCC plan, you are required to have these bullet points and a few others in place. For example, facility description, drainage, facility diagram, location of all storage containers, site security, staffing, facility, lighting, master drain valves if they're applicable, transfer procedures and equipment, including piping. For example, every time a bulk fuel transfer takes place into your mobile refueler, what is your standard operation procedures under your SPCC plan to minimize a fuel release? And then also, if a fuel release does occur, what steps are needed to be taken? Plan availability at the facility. Also, if there are changes within your facility, you need to update it within 6 months, or every 5 calendar years, you need to recertify your SPCC plan. So for example, if you got one done in 2020, no operations change for your facility for 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24, you would be under the federal law required to update your plan in 2025. Monitoring inspections, want to stress, if you have an AST or a UST system, you likely could have a combined monthly inspection that addresses your above ground storage tank requirements plus your SPCC plan. A lot of those questions or a lot of those monthly inspections overlap. I would say 60 to 70% of those questions could address it, if not higher. Overfill protection, another one that you would want to touch on. BMPs, best management places in place. For example, spill response. Again, yes, no questions. You're doing your monthly inspection. Checklist for fuel transfers. One key component of your SPCC plan is the annual training. That will be looked at very hard if you do have a spill event. I should have mentioned this. If you have a spill event at your facility and it does involve the MPCA where they conduct a site visit or request for information, they will request a copy of your SPCC plan. It should not just sit on the shelf and collect dust. There are monthly, like I said, monthly inspections, annual inspections, annual training, and annual review of your process, of your plan. Here's two examples of a decision tree to make it easier for individuals who are affiliated with the SPCC plan. On the right is if a spill occurs, what action items should you be taking per your SPCC plan? And then also here are some contact information as well. So a takeaway, again, understand your facility and operations. The approximate costs are about $4,000 to $6,000, depending on, again, your operations and your process. I'll pause for questions there to see if there are any or any general ones.
Thanks, Mike. I don't see any in the chat, but what might you recommend people who don't have an SPCC? What might be their first steps in starting that process?
My suggestion would walk around your facility and get a gauge of your inventory of petroleum products. So basically, anything that is storing a petroleum product, 55 gallons or more, get that inventory and determine if that inventory fluctuates. For example, if you have a mobile refueler that is 1,000 gallons, okay, you already know you're just 320 gallons shy. And you go in, you have 2 mobile refuelers, clearly you need an SPCC plan. I would first do the inventory to see where you sit. Depending on that, then initiate that process of establishing an SPCC plan. If it is below 10,000 gallons or you don't have a standalone AST of 5,000 gallons or greater, then I would make the determination if you so desire, want to create a self-certified SPCC plan. There are a ton of examples online. The challenge that I've seen with online is kind of falling under the aviation industry. The other is knowing what your operations are. For example, your mobile refueler might or might not be parked in a secondary containment. It might be parked over a manhole that it might be in your best management practice to throw a heavy rubber tarp over that every time a fuel transfer takes place in that mobile refueler. One might have that, one might not. So kind of thinking through, if I were to have a spill right now, what are the potential likely the scenarios? And if I were to lose 50 gallons right now, where would it go? And what action items would I have to take? But kind of coming back full circle, I would first do the inventory, and that would be your first step. Good thought though.
Great. Well, are there any other questions from our audience on any of the presentation today? It could have been from the beginning all the way through.
Mike, can you hear me?
I can.
This is Brent, Fillmore County Airport. We have an above ground 2,000 gallon tank. Will we have to do an SPCC deal for every year?
Well, not every year. This is how I would navigate the process.
Okay.
Yes, you need an SPCC plan because you exceed that 1,320 gallons.
Right.
I'm assuming that the product that is stored is either a gasoline or a oil product.
Well, it's 100 low lead. You're talking about.
Yes. Okay.
So aviation fuel is what I got in there.
Okay.
And then we have an FBO that's privately run, subcontracted. Do we need, he doesn't have a lot of quantity in there. He doesn't probably have enough to meet any of those guidelines, but do I need to do his count too, or is he responsible for that?
Well, it all depends on what your agreement is with that entity. The way the airport
Okay.
commission navigates that is we have leases. So Mike Harder's aviation FBO would lease from the Airports Commission and have an FBO at Flying Cloud Airport, for example, and they are obligated under the lease to meet all state and federal compliance requirements. If they meet
Okay.
the threshold of needing needing a tank that has to be registered with the state or an SPCC plan, it's in my best interest to work with them to provide guidance, but ultimately it is their responsibility. If your FBO, it sounds like it's a contractor.
Yeah.
I don't know who owns and maintains what. So that's
Yeah, we own the building, but and he pays us a lease, but basically he's responsible for everything inside the building. I mean, we do fire extinguishers, but beyond that, that's pretty much his responsibility outside of that.
I would expect that since he's the owner and operator of the operations, if that makes sense, because he's the one who is utilizing the 55-gallon drums, for example, for maintenance. You have no role in that. It would be that entity on needing those compliance, or that entity to meet those compliance requirements. Back to your system, if I understood it correctly, you have a 2,000-gallon AST, which is gas. I would expect that you would be required to have an SPCC plan for that system. But the first question that you should ask is, do you have any other above ground storage tanks containers that are owned by Fillmore County located at that airport?
No.
Okay, then the easy question, then you need a self-certified, if you so desire, which I would highly recommend since you only have one tank, to self-certify an SPCC plan. I would look online, find a good template, find some good examples of best management practices for spill response, spill control. And then I would also probably review your signage is on that above ground storage tank. And I think you could put your SPCC plan together. Consultants probably don't want to hear this, but I think you could put your SPCC plan together with minimal work. I think there are a lot of great resources online.
And also the leak detection inspection, that on that system, it has an automatic leak detection system. That still needs to be tested annually, correct?
Yeah. Is it one of the sensors that would go into alarm mode, or is it one of those caps that just pop if a water fuel mixture in the interstitial port?
No, there's a sensor on our system that basically tells leak detection. It's a double wall tank that does leak detection. It's also got a physical gauge outside on the tank. So there's two types of detection.
Does it go into alarm mode right at that tank?
No.
How would you know if that interstitial sensor went into alarm mode?
Well, I would catch it. I guess I would catch it during my weekly sump test is when I would catch it.
My interpretation is you would have to get a third-party contractor to conduct a functionality test of that AST. I also think it's in your best interest to get that done, because I have seen they started this program maybe about 5 years ago when we started to have to functionality test of interstitial sensors. I would thought that about 40% of our MAC interstitial sensors were not operating as intended. So for example, I was losing one side, I was losing a little fuel, and that sensor never went into alarm mode. I would, if I was in your shoes, if you have to do any maintenance on that AST, if you have to bring out a contractor to do anything, change a filter or anything like that, I would tag along that, hey, could you do a functionality test of this interstitial sensor? It should take them 10 minutes, and potentially they could lump that into your service call.
I see. Yeah, and I do all the filter changes and stuff myself, so I don't typically have somebody come out.
Okay. Okay.
So I would have to hire somebody to do that probably.
And maybe, is there any other tank system out at that airport?
No.
Okay. I was going to say you could maybe lump it in with something else. There might be, I don't think you can do this. If I was in your shoes, I would reach out to an MPCA inspector. You can manage it the way you want and say, hey, could I ever document it myself?
Okay.
I'm assuming you grab a pipe wrench, you pull it out, you put it in a 5-gallon, put it in a bucket. It's going to go into alarm mode. You dry it off and you slide it back in there. They may not encourage that, but I don't know what your resources are or else how you want to do that. But that potentially could be a method.
Okay.
I hope that helped.
Yeah, it does. Definitely. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions for Mike?
Okay.
I'm not hearing any other additional questions. Mike has his contact information on the screen, so if you'd rather email him directly or call him directly, there's that option as well. But I want to thank Mike so much for his time and his research on this topic and presenting to our group in this AirTAP session. I really appreciate that.
I hope it was helpful, and thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mike, Melissa, and everyone that attended. I did put a link to a survey in our evaluation in the chat box, so feel free to fill it out. We do use your information and feedback for future trainings. And again, we have 5 more coming up over the next several weeks, so we hope to see you guys again. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Have a wonderful day.